Hello, I'm Kamla. My guest today is actress Karen Allen. She's not only an actress, but also a fashion designer, a director, and a producer, and she's also made a short film. She's here in San Francisco for the San Francisco International Film Festival, where her film, Colwell, is playing. It's having its world premiere actually here in San Francisco. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks.
When was the first time you came to San Francisco?
I came here when I was 16 on a trip with my family. We lived in Washington, D.C., and my mom and dad and my younger sister and I piled into whatever car they had at the time. And they wanted to do one of those drives where we went from the East Coast out to California, drove down the whole highway, Pacific Highway, and came back. So we did this loop around the United States, and I think that was my first time here. And I remember it really well because it was very cold and very windy, and we were desperately wanting it to be warm and nice, and we were freezing. But it's a beautiful city. I've been here many times since.
Yeah, you've shot quite a few films here too.
Yeah, we shot Shoot the Moon here. We shot East of Eden, not far from here. I'm pretty sure I have shot another film here as well, which is not coming to my mind right now.
But Animal House was not shot here.
That was up north. That was in Eugene, Oregon.
Okay, yeah. So that was the first film, right? That was your first film, Animal House?
That was my first feature film, yes, yeah.
And how did you get that role?
I was living in New York City. I was studying at the Lee Strasberg Institute. I walked through the lobby one day and I saw a 3x5 card on the bulletin board. It said, feature film casting college-age actors and actresses, send picture and resume. And I popped a resume in. I had never done a film. I had a theater background, and I got a call and they wanted to meet me, and I went to Universal Studios on Park Avenue in New York City, and I walked in and the casting director said, I know you don't have an agent, I know you're not in the union, but you're my girl. And she kind of patted me on the shoulder, and she had just seen my resume in the theater and seen the photograph of me I sent, and she just saw me as Katie. She just thought I was the character.
So how surprised were you that the Animal House became such an iconic film?
I think pretty wildly surprised, because having no background in film whatsoever, I mean, when I made Animal House, I had never met an actor who'd been in a film in my life, much less a director or anybody that worked in the film industry. It was completely, I was in the theater world, and the film world seemed like a totally separate, different world. I guess I, like many people, thought of films as, in Hollywood, like it all took place in Los Angeles and stuff. It wasn't really until I had been in New York for a while that I realized there was as much going on in the film world in New York as there was in Los Angeles. But I didn't have a clue. First of all, didn't have a clue about being in a film. I certainly didn't have any capacity to judge whether a film would be successful or not. I mean, I didn't know anything about it at all. I just, showed up in Oregon and shot the film, and a year later it came out and was such a huge success. I think it surprised everybody, because even Universal Studios was not very keen on the film. They were kind of, they didn't really get it, and they handed it over to a young executive named Sean Daniel, who championed it and helped the film get made, and it surprised everybody at Universal Studios when it turned out to be such a successful film.
Do you ever watch it again?
Oh yeah, I call it the film that won't stop celebrating itself. We constantly are getting together as a group. I'm still very good friends with all of those actors that were in the film, and sadly, we keep losing them. Verna Bloom just passed away, but Stephen First passed away a couple years ago, and we lost Doug Kenny and Harold Ramis, yeah, it's probably, of all the films I've ever been in, it's probably the film I end up seeing the most, because there's a lot of gatherings of all of the people in that film, and we'll do special screenings. We get invited to come to comedy festivals and show the film, and so I think I see it once every couple of years or something.
What about Indiana Jones? That was another memorable role for you. How did you get that role?
Well, Raiders of the Lost Ark, John Landis, who directed Animal House, is good friends with Steven Spielberg and was way back then. And I had done another film called A Small Circle of Friends that takes place at Harvard University. And Rob Cohen, who had directed that, was also very good friends with Spielberg. And they both spoke very highly of me when he was getting ready to cast Raiders of the Lost Ark. And he asked to meet me when he came to New York. I'm sure he met lots of other people as well. But based on our first meeting, where I just sat in a room with him for 15 minutes and we talked, and he then asked if I would come to Los Angeles and screen test with a couple of actors, because Tom Selleck had been cast as Indiana Jones, and then he'd already done the pilot for what's it called, Magnum PI, and they wouldn't let him out of his contract. So suddenly there was no Indiana Jones. But they had already kind of gotten involved in the process of trying to find a Marion Ravenswood. So I flew to Los Angeles and I auditioned with Tim Matheson, who had been in Animal House, and John Shea, who was a wonderful New York actor, still is. And they cast me before they knew who the Indiana Jones was going to be. And it occurred to them somewhere along the line. I think, Harrison was not in their mind. He just was already playing Han Solo, and the second Star Wars was coming out. And I think they just thought, could he play Indiana Jones and Han Solo? And they were kind of like, maybe not. Because they knew they were going to go forward and do more Indiana Jones films, and they knew they were going to go forward and do more Star Wars films. So maybe they saw it as a bit of a conflict or something, but worked out okay. I mean, he's quite wonderful in both, so he pulled it off.
What do you think that the film contributed, your role in that film, Indiana Jones film, towards breaking the mold of actresses and, because you're quite feisty there.
Well, I certainly, when I read the script, and in fact, the scene that I auditioned with was the scene in the bar, although it wasn't necessarily the scene where I'm drinking, but it was the scene, where he comes in and I punch him in the chin and, basically, fight with him about the fact that he left at a certain point in my past. And I just liked the character a lot. I thought she was a very strong character. When I read the script and I realized that they were introducing her, in this bar, drinking this big mountain men under the table, and that's how she was making a living and surviving there. I thought it was one of the best introductions I had ever read of a character in anything. I hadn't read that many film scripts at that point, but I'd certainly seen a lot of films. I mean, I've been a huge film fan my whole life. And there's not a lot of, introductions of female characters that are quite that, bold.
A little bit Catherine Hepburnish.
Yes, or Marlene Dietrich, or any of those kind of, in the 40s, there were a lot of very wonderful, feisty, tough, wonderful women,
Betty Davis.
Betty Davis, Barbara Stanwyck. I mean, you could, Ingrid Bergman, they were wonderful, women, and then, I don't know what happened to us in the 50s and 60s, but all of a sudden, it feels like the characters became highly over-feminized, and, there was a lot of, women in film for the most part. Although there were exceptions, I certainly, through that period of time, I loved Julie Christie, who always played a very intelligent, complex woman, Natalie Wood, who always played but there were an awful lot of, I think, film images of women in the 50s and the 60s that went against the grain of all those strong women in the 40s films, from my perspective. So it was great to see a character written like this, and I would have to hand it to Sigourney Weaver in Alien as well. That was a significant sort of strong character role, and around the same time, Sissy Spacek played Loretta Lynn in Coal Miner's Daughter, which was she was a very feisty, wonderful character.
She won an Oscar for that, didn't she?
Yeah, I think she did. Yeah, but I mean, there was this emergence now suddenly there in the early mid 70s of these sort of much stronger
Sally Field.
characters. Yes, that's right. That all came out of, I think, the women's movement, and came out of, the sort of this turn that Hollywood was taking towards more independent type of films, which began with, films like Easy Rider and stuff like that sort of shifted. Suddenly there was a new paradigm, and the kinds of films that had been made in the 50s and 60s were not appealing to the young audiences that were coming up, through the period of time.
Now, you were originally interested in becoming a fashion designer, and you
Yes.
went to the Fashion Institute in New York.
Most specifically, a textile designer, but also a fashion designer as well. So I studied both, and
How did you, who taught you knitting? Because that's
my
what,
grandmother, when I was maybe 4 years old. So I had been knitting, I started knitting almost before I remember. And I had always knitted, and I had always I'd always loved, I call it my first ecstasy, is design. I used to, as a young child, like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, I would go to either rug stores or to fabric stores or any store that had textiles, and I would stand there, and my heart would pound in my chest, and my imagination would kind of explode, and I would think oh my God, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. It was like I would almost have like visions of like all the extraordinary things that I could do with all of these beautiful colors and shapes and textures and designs and patterns, and it was something that's hard to explain, but it completely possessed me as a child, fascinated me, and so it was the first thing I thought, this is something I could really do for a living. So I went to FIT, and it was only a 2-year college then, and I stayed almost the whole 2 years, but I kind of lost the plot, as they say. I mean, by the time I was getting ready to graduate, it was not clear to me that, what that path was going to be at the time. So I decided to kind of go off in some other directions. And, it's interesting that I eventually circled back to design, because it was certainly something I had a very strong attachment to.
So could it be that sometimes going to school doesn't answer your question? Because your passion that you had, you said you lost the plot. So sometimes when you go to school, if you're thinking differently or whatever, you're probably 5% of the class that doesn't connect with what is being taught. I'm just saying that sometimes school is not meant for everybody.
It's true. I mean, I am a very hands-on learner, and potentially it could have been. I went to FIT in 1969, so that was a very profound period in our history in the United States. So I was 17, yeah, and Woodstock had just happened that summer. I mean, there was a lot going on. Janis Joplin died, Jimi Hendrix died that first year I was there. Kent State happened. There was huge protests against the war in Vietnam. So it was a very interesting time to be a freshman in college, because the world was, much more electrified than anything that was going on inside that classroom. And there was a lot going on in the world, and it felt almost wrong to be sitting in a classroom at that time. It felt like there was a lot to be learning and a lot to be doing. It just didn't. I somehow found myself feeling very torn about being in school.
Mm-hmm. So the reason I asked about your textile is because this film, Colwell, is a film about a postmistress or a postmaster. I don't know what is the right way to describe.
Yeah.
And the post office is closing. So you are looking back. So I'm wondering what was the backstory you built for that character in the film, and if any of your textile experience came into it, because you have a shop. You know, so when I was watching you, I said, oh, she must have done this at the shop, you know, when we were putting the letters away, when you're opening, fixing the coffee and all of that. I said, I wonder how much of it is something that you do in your store.
I'm never in my store. Fortunately, I have a wonderful team of beautiful women who work in my store, but I have a design studio above this store, and I have, well, I used to have 10 Japanese knitting machines that I had set up. Now I've deconstructed a bunch of them, but I work on about 4. And when I have time in between other projects and stuff, I do go up and I'm in the studio and I make things on these beautiful Japanese knitting machines that are mostly hand manipulated, although I have some that are attached to motors that work in a different way. But yeah, no, the store itself is, you know, it's not really something, I really don't want to sort of spend a lot of time in the store, but you know, I love making things with my hands, which is fantastic. And now, you know, mostly, I don't so much hand knit anymore, but everything I do, I really have learned how to collaborate with these very extraordinary machines. It took me years to really learn how to use them well. But you know, now there's a partnership between me and these machines that is quite satisfying, actually.
So back to the film. How did you prepare for that role? Because it's a very quiet role, and there's a lot of underlying sadness.
Yes. Well, you know, it's very interesting. The story itself that was originally written in the script, and a lot of the story that we shot, it has gone through a lot of transitions over the time. You know, Tom Quinn, the filmmaker and writer, director, I think, you know, was in a process of really discovering who this character is and what he wanted to say about this woman who, in a way, we're making a film about a town losing their identity and a woman simultaneously feeling as though she's losing her identity in the sense, and I think it is very true, and I'm of an age where I know a lot of women that are going through this right now, probably men as well, but I tend to have more conversations with the women about it, but you know, who are at the kind of coming to the end of their careers, and they don't, you know, they're very vital, interesting women that were really, you know, connected to the work that they did over the years. And it's coming down to that moment of sort of, am I done? Is this over? And if so, who am I and where do I go from here? And I think Tom created this within this sort of small town structure, is a woman who has lost her husband. She's living alone. The post office is attached to her actual house, and she's created a kind of community around it. So not only is she losing her job, but she's losing her community in a sense. Like this community will, you know, her routine is she gets up and she makes her coffee and she feeds her chickens and she puts on her uniform and she opens that magical window, and into her world comes the town. And she, you know, she makes them coffee and she's got, you know, everything there for them, and they can sit and talk and catch up with each other's lives. And, you know, there's some elderly women in the town.
Crochet.
They come just to be there, to just not be alone. And all of a sudden, you know, a letter arrives telling her that the post office is going to be no longer. And it not only threatens, you know, the town and this place that they have to come together, but it threatens her whole sense of identity. Like, who is she really if she doesn't have this place? You know, if she's not opening that window every day, if she's just there, if the window stays closed and she's just there by herself, like, how does she go on with her life?
So the world is no longer coming to her. She has to go out.
She has to go out to it, and that's maybe not her strength at this particular moment in the film. You know, there's a scene where I actually move towards I kind of reach out towards.
Yes, that was a very sad scene.
Yeah, but she just doesn't quite, she has to re-find her way in the world.
Yeah, you could sense the hurt in her face and her demeanor when she turns back with that can of soup.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
How did the film change you? Did it get you thinking in different ways? I'm just wondering.
Well, you know, I mean, I think that I very much do identify with her plight, you know.
But you have an option in real life, you have.
I do. You know, I was actually talking with a friend of mine this morning about this. You know, because when I was raising my son on my own, and I couldn't do all the traveling that I had done when I was, you know, footloose and fancy-free before I became a parent, I created this design studio and the store to give myself something creative to do while he was growing up. And what's wonderful about it now is fast forward 16 years, I think I started the store and the studio 16 years ago. I have thought about closing it a number of times because he's grown up now, he's out in the world. But every once in a while I think, no. Well, first of all, I'm still very much enjoying the design studio. And I do all the buying for the store, and I very much enjoy that. I love to go out and look for beautiful textiles. And we carry about 100 designers from all over the world that I've handpicked, that are people whose work I just think is beautiful. So that's very satisfying. So I do, just by luck, have like something that if for some reason I decided I didn't want to work as an actress anymore, as a director, or if for some reason people just stopped offering me work, I at least have something else I could do. A lot of people don't.
You have plan B.
I have plan B. I didn't mean it for it to be a plan B in a sense, but it is. I mean, it's not that I would suddenly wake up one day and just say, gee, I have nothing to do, or I don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing. I do feel like I have some other interests. You know, sometimes people have done one thing their whole life, and they don't. You know, when they lose that one thing, they really don't know what else they can do or what else, you know, might really interest them, or even if they have the opportunity to pursue it at 65 or 70 or however old people are when they're retiring these days. But I mean, a lot of my friends are that age, you know, they're between 60 and 70 years old, so everybody's grappling with that sort of stuff.
It's an interesting time, isn't it? Because in this modern age, because our lifespan has extended, everything is, you know, people didn't used to live this long.
Yeah.
And so now you're a new generation that has to think about what to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Retirement is not in the horizon.
For
many.
For many, yeah.
Because you're still able to execute and do stuff. Like, you know, you still have your store, but in the film, that lady has no hope.
Well, she might. I mean, you know,
Yes,
what's interesting is I'll be interested to see how an audience responds, or how, you know, critics, or, you know, anybody who's going to write about the film. I'll be fascinated to see whether or not they see it as a hopeful, like, you know, is this just the beginning of the next phase of her life, or is her life kind of, is it sad, you know, or has she really lost everything that she relies on and depends on, or does she have the strength to start all over again? You know, she doesn't want to start all over again by moving away from her home. Like they're saying, well, we'll give you this other job, you know, 30 miles from here. She chooses not to do that, but, you know, she could be somebody who would just, you know, reinvent herself and find something else to do. Or maybe it'll turn out she'll just be absolutely fine there on her farm, and, you know, it'll just be, but it's a transition. No, there's no way around it being a transition for someone, you know.
Do you have any other films coming up?
No, I'm about to direct a play, which I'm going to go into rehearsals in about a month. And I have a film that I want to direct, and we're working on raising the money to do that. It's based on a play that I directed about 10 years ago that I just absolutely love. It's women.
What's it called?
Sisters. It's called The Batting Cage.
And written by whom?
It's written by Joan Ackerman, who's a wonderful playwright. Yeah.
We have run out of time.
Okay.
I wish we had more time because you have so many interesting things to share with us. Thank you so much, and we wish you all the best.
Oh, thanks. My pleasure.
And thank you for watching. Join us next week for another new conversation. If you missed any of our shows, you can watch them on our website. And as always, thank you.